started like any other dig. We were a team of 6, experts in archaeology, history, and preservation. We had been granted access to an undisclosed site in the Middle East, a location that had been off limits for decades, buried beneath layers of sand and secrecy. The documents we received were vague, but what intrigued us most was a single line buried in the official report. An anomaly detected beneath the ruins. Origin unknown. No one in our field ignores a phrase like that. Anomalies meant discovery. Discovery meant legacy. So we went. For weeks, we dug. Days under the relentless sun. Nights spent documenting our findings by the dim glow of lanterns. We unearthed relics, fragments of an ancient civilization long forgotten, carvings that bore no resemblance to any known script. The deeper we went, the more questions arose. There were no records of a settlement here, no historical mention of a culture that should have existed in this barren stretch of desert. Then we found it. At first, we thought it was nothing more than a buried chamber, another collapsed structure lost to time. But as we removed the sand, the shape became clear. A coffin, sealed, lead-lined, something that should not have been there. We expected bones. We expected remnants of some ancient figure, someone significant enough to warrant such an unusual burial. We were wrong. I remember the moment we brushed away the last of the dirt, the silence that followed. How the wind, which had been blowing consistently all day, suddenly stopped, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The engravings on the lid weren't in any known ancient script. They were in English. Do not open. Not a name, not a date, a warning. The year carved below it, 1902. But the soil we had dug through, undisturbed for thousands of years. There was no logical way this coffin should have been here. No expedition from that time had ever reported this discovery. We argued. Some of us wanted to stop. The warning unsettled them. But others, myself included, couldn't walk away. This was history, and history demanded to be uncovered. Then we heard the noise. At first, we thought it was shifting sand. Then we realized it was coming from inside the coffin, and against every instinct screaming at us to leave it buried. We opened it. We documented everything. Every step of the excavation was recorded, logged, photographed. The site itself was unlike any we had worked on before. There were no remains of a settlement, no signs of human activity, just endless sand and the ruins of something that shouldn't have existed. Our team was small, but experienced. Dr. Khalid, our lead researcher, was a historian specializing in lost civilizations. He was meticulous, methodical, rarely given to speculation. Then there was Sarah, our epigrapher, fluent in more dead languages than most people have living relatives. If there was a code to be cracked, she would crack it. Amir, our excavation specialist, had been in the field for over a decade. Until this site, I had never seen him unnerved. Then there was Daniel, our documentary filmmaker, whose camera captured things even his eyes couldn't explain. And finally, there was me. I was the one who insisted we keep going. That whatever we had found was too important to leave buried. For days, we worked. The coffin was buried deeper than expected, beneath layers of sediment that indicated it had been here long before recorded history. The deeper we dug, the stranger things became. The carvings on the surrounding ruins weren't like any we had seen before. At first glance, they resembled ancient Mesopotamian inscriptions, but closer analysis revealed subtle distortions, words that twisted and changed under different lighting, as if they refused to be understood. Then, there were the photographs. Old, brittle, buried beneath the sand. Photographs that shouldn't have survived. images of men in early 20th century excavation gear, standing where we stood. Their faces blurred, scratched out, some missing entirely, as if something had erased them. We should have left then, but we didn't. The anomaly, the coffin, was all that mattered. It wasn't just an archaeological mystery. It was a contradiction. A 1902 burial in a site that predated human civilization itself. And yet, there it was. When we finally exposed the full length of the coffin, something felt different. The air was heavier. The temperature dropped, though the sun was still high. We were sweating, yet shivering. It was as if the entire desert was watching. Then we saw the markings. Unlike the ruins, these engravings were clear, precise, etched with deliberation. Do not open. The letters had been deeply scratched, as though whoever had written them had done so in desperation. Some of us hesitated. Amir outright refused to go near it. Dr. Khalid kept his distance, watching, thinking. But Sarah was the one who noticed something else. The lid wasn't locked, not in any traditional sense. There was no latch, no mechanism, just a thick, uneven seal, as if someone had simply welded it shut with force alone. But it was old, brittle, and so, as the sun dipped low, casting long, twisting shadows over the sand, we broke the seal. There was no sound as it cracked apart, no gust of air, no release of dust. Just silence. Then Daniel whispered, "What the hell?" Inside, wrapped in decayed fabric, was a corpse. A human corpse. And yet, something about it was wrong. At first I couldn't place it, but then Sarah stepped closer, lifting her lantern, and the dim light illuminated its mouth. It had been sewn shut, tightly, violently. Thick black thread bound its lips together, as if someone, whoever had buried this thing, hadn't been trying to preserve it. They had been trying to keep something inside. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then the wind returned, but it didn't sound like wind anymore. It sounded like a whisper. And as Amir reached out to touch the corpse's face, we realized something else. Its skin wasn't rotting. It was stretching, tightening, as if whatever was inside it was waking up. We should have stopped. We should have listened. But by then, it was already too late. The wind had returned, but it was different now. Not a gust, not a shifting of sand, but a whispering pressure against our skin. Something that wrapped itself around us like unseen hands. The sun was setting, dragging the desert into darkness, and the air had changed. It was colder. Not the kind of cold that comes with nightfall, not a relief from the scorching heat, but a wrongness that settled in our bones. A deep, creeping chill that radiated from the coffin itself. Amir didn't want to touch it. He stood back, arms crossed, shaking his head. "This isn't right," he muttered. "We shouldn't be doing this." None of us disagreed, but the coffin, the thing that should not have been there, was too much to ignore. Sarah ran her fingers over the warning carved into the lid. "Do not open." The words had been gouged deep, jagged and uneven, the marks erratic as though whoever had written them had been in a hurry, or terrified. Then Daniel noticed something else. "Look at this," he whispered, running a hand along the edges. This wasn't made to be opened. Not easily. The lid wasn't nailed down. It wasn't secured with hinges or locks. Instead, it had been fused to the base, as if someone had melted it shut. And yet, beneath the strange, hardened seal, there was resistance. Something inside was pushing back. Dr. Khalid retrieved a chisel and mallet, hands steady, movements careful. "We document everything," he said, almost to himself. "We take it slow." The first strike echoed across the ruins. The second felt louder. By the third, the wind had stopped again. The fourth, the light flickered. A single, sharp pop as one of our overhead work lamps burst. Shards of glass rained onto the sand. Sarah jumped back. Daniel swore. Amir took another step away. And then the equipment failed. Every camera, every sensor, every piece of technology we had went dark. Our radio crackled, just once, a sound so brief, so distorted, it almost sounded like a breath. Then silence, deep, heavy, suffocating. The lid shifted, not from our hands, not from the tools, from inside. I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering. The seal was breaking apart in splinters, fragments of some strange, resin-like substance falling away as the weight inside shifted again. No one spoke. No one moved. We should have walked away. Instead, we pried it open. The smell hit us first. Not rot, not decay, something worse. A scent we couldn't name, but one that made our stomachs lurch, our throats close, as if our bodies knew before our minds did. This was wrong. The wood groaned as the lid gave way, and beneath it, a body. A man. Perfectly preserved. His skin was grey, dry, pulled tight against his bones. His clothes, dark, early 20th century, were intact, untouched by time. And then we saw his mouth, sewn, tightly. Thick, black thread pierced his lips, pulling them shut with a force that had torn the skin at the edges. The stitching was rough, violent, like someone had done it in a hurry, or with desperation. Sarah covered her mouth. Amir cursed. Dr. Khalid just stared. Daniel lifted his camera, hand trembling. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. Then I saw his hands. They were folded neatly over his chest, fingers curled inward as if frozen mid-clench, and beneath them, clutched in his grip, a letter. Old, brittle. The edges worn, the paper yellowed, but the ink was bold. Sarah hesitated, then reached forward. The moment she touched the letter, something cracked. Not the wood, not the ground, the body. A long, slow splitting sound, the dry, stretched skin at the corpse's lips beginning to tear along the stitches. Then, for the first time since we had arrived, I felt something I hadn't before. Not curiosity, not excitement, not even fear. Something else. The undeniable, gut-wrenching certainty that we were being watched. Sarah's fingers barely grazed the letter when the corpse's eyelids snapped open. And beneath them, nothing. No pupils, no irises, just black, empty, moving. The letter slipped from Sarah's fingers. It landed in the sand, half open. The words scrawled across it hurried, erratic. Seal it back, or suffer. A sharp intake of breath, not from any of us. Then a scream. Amir's. Then, the lights went out. The fire was dying. It had been strong at first, flickering bright against the emptiness of the desert. But now it was little more than a dull glow, swallowed by the wind. We huddled close, not speaking, not looking at each other. The air was thick with something unsaid, something that lingered in the back of our throats, heavier than the sand in our boots, heavier than the night pressing down around us. Amir hadn't spoken since we closed the coffin. since the corpse opened its eyes. He had just sat there, silent, staring at the sand, his hands curled tight, knuckles white, listening. Because that's when we started hearing them, the whispers. At first, we thought it was the wind. The desert had a way of making sounds twist, gusts slipping between the ruins, turning into strange, distant voices. But this wasn't the wind. The first time I heard it, I thought it was my own breath, rattling against the cold. A soft murmur, just beneath the crackling fire. Then it happened again. A whisper. Close. Too close. A voice just behind me, low, guttural, speaking words I didn't understand. I turned fast, expecting to see one of the others, but there was no one there. Sarah rubbed at her arms. "It's just the desert," she muttered, as if trying to convince herself. "The heat messing with us." No one answered her, because we all knew it wasn't the heat. The fire dimmed further. The generator had been acting strange ever since the coffin was opened, and now our equipment was useless. The monitors flickered, cutting to static. The radios crackled, but when Daniel pressed the receiver, all we got was silence. And then, a sound. Not static, not interference. A breath. Deep, ragged, right against the speaker. Sarah yanked her radio away like it had burned her. Dr. Khalid stood slowly. "We should check the perimeter." No one wanted to, but we had to. We moved in pairs, flashlights bobbing in the dark. The ruins loomed in the distance, just beyond the reach of the fire's glow. The dig site was still there, the coffin still shut. But the ground around it was different. Patterns had been drawn in the sand. Circles, lines, symbols none of us recognized. Daniel cursed under his breath. Who did this? No one answered, because none of us had. I felt the weight of the night pressing down on me. I turned toward the tents, toward the only place that felt safe. And that's when I saw it. Amir's tent. The flap had been pulled open, the fabric torn from the inside, and Amir was gone. The others saw it at the same time I did. Sarah took a step forward. "Amir," she called, voice too thin, too quiet. No answer. I reached for my radio, fingers numb, pressing the button so hard my hand shook. "Amir, come in." Static. Daniel grabbed a flashlight, swung the beam toward the dunes. His breath hitched. There's... We turned. Something moved. A shape, just at the edge of the dunes. Not Amir. Not anything human. It stood too still. Too long. Then, it shifted. A sudden jerking movement, like it had just noticed us. And then it was gone. Swallowed by the night. We ran to Amir's tent. Inside, his bag was still there. His boots, his watch, still on his pillow, ticking softly in the silence. No blood, no struggle. Just emptiness. Like he had simply ceased to exist. Sarah covered her mouth. "We need to go." No one argued. We turned toward the trucks, toward the only escape we had. And then, a scream, but not Amir's, not anyone's, not human. It ripped through the night, deep and raw, like something breaking apart from the inside. And from the dunes, something moved again. Closer this time. We didn't sleep that night. Not after Amir disappeared. Not after that thing screamed. The night stretched long, thick with silence that wasn't empty. The wind howled, but underneath it, there was something else. Something moving. Something watching. We should have left then. We should have packed up, burned everything and fled. But the desert wouldn't let us. Morning came hollow and grey. The sky was wrong. The sun rose slow, red like an open wound. The air was thick, heavy, clinging to our skin. We found Amir at dawn, half buried in the sand. His body curled like he'd tried to dig his way out. We ran to him, hands trembling as we pulled at the sand. But the moment we touched him, his head rolled back, and we saw his face, his mouth, stretched wide, not in a scream, not in pain, but something twisted, something forced. His lips, his jaw, pulled apart, unnaturally, impossibly, like something had tried to peel him open from the inside. Daniel backed away. No. This isn't. Sarah covered her mouth, eyes wide, breath coming too fast. What happened to him? I knelt, forcing myself to look closer, forcing myself to see. And that's when I noticed. His tongue was gone. No blood, no wound, just emptiness, like it had never been there at all. A shadow fell over us. Dr. Khalid's voice was quiet, but it cut through the stillness like a blade. Where is the body? I turned. At first, I didn't understand. Then I saw what he meant. The coffin was empty. The corpse, the thing inside, was gone. Panic hit like a sickness. We scrambled to pack, to move, to run. But the moment we tried to start the trucks, dead. Every single engine. The generator too. No power. No signal. No way out. And then, Sarah screamed. She stood, rigid, hands clutching her head, her nails dug into her scalp, breath coming in ragged, uneven gasps. Then, she started writing. Not on paper, not on the ground, on her own arms. Fingers curled, nails dragging over skin, drawing deep red lines. No, not random. Symbols, the same ones from the sand. Dr. Khalid grabbed her hands. Sarah, stop! Stop! She thrashed, body twisting, breath hitching in something close to a sob. Her eyes rolled back, white, empty. And then she spoke, a voice that was not hers, ancient, deep, too many voices in one. The first time was a mistake. She gasped, fingers twitching, still writing, still carving. The second time was a warning. Daniel's face was pale. What the hell is she saying? Sarah's lips parted, her mouth stretched too wide, too unnatural. The third time, silence. Her hands snapped to her own throat, choking, strangling, fingers digging, pressing, tearing. Dr. Khalid wrenched her hands away, forcing her down, holding her still. Sarah, look at me. Her body convulsed. Then she stopped. A slow breath, a blink. And just like that, she was Sarah again. Tears streaked her face. Her chest rose and fell in quick, sharp gasps. She looked down, at her own hands, at the symbols carved into her skin, and she started screaming. The shadows were moving now, not like before. Closer, not hiding anymore. Sarah sat, shaking, wrapped in a blanket she didn't seem to feel. Dr. Khalid and Daniel argued about leaving, about walking, about trying. But I knew the truth. We couldn't leave. Not really. Not unless it let us. And it wouldn't. Not now. Not ever. We decided to make a run for it. We didn't pack. We didn't speak. We just ran. Through the dunes, through the thick shifting sand, through the weight of something unseen pressing at our backs, clawing at our shadows. Sarah stumbled, gasping. Daniel grabbed her wrist, yanked her up. Move. Just move. There was no plan, no direction, only one thought. Away. Away from the dig site. Away from the empty coffin. Away from whatever had crawled out of it. The stars were wrong. I saw them as we ran, looked up, chest burning, legs aching, and the sky. The sky. The constellations, twisted, broken apart, realigned into something I didn't recognize. Something I shouldn't recognize. Shapes, symbols. The same ones from the coffin. The same ones Sarah had carved into her own skin. I tripped, fell hard. Sand filled my mouth, my nose, my throat. Someone grabbed me, hauled me up. Dr. Khalid. His eyes were wild, his breath ragged. "Don't stop," he rasped. I nodded, spat out sand, kept running. And then Sarah screamed. We turned. She was gone. Only her footprints remained, trailing behind us, stopping abruptly as if she had never been there at all. Daniel made a sound, a choking noise, raw and broken. She was... His voice cracked. She was just here. He took a step back, staring at the empty space where Sarah should have been. "No," he muttered. "No, no, no." Then his head snapped up. His face went white. I followed his gaze. The sand behind us. It was shifting, moving, but not from the wind, not naturally. Something was there, beneath, waiting. Daniel turned, staggered back. "We have to..." Gone. No sound, no scream, just gone. 1 second he was there. The next, nothing. Dr. Khalid grabbed my arm. "We need to go." I couldn't move. I stared at the sand where Daniel had just been, at the empty footprints leading nowhere. My mouth was dry. My lungs refused to work. "Move!" Khalid shoved me, and finally my legs obeyed. We saw the village at dawn. Or what should have been dawn. The sky was still dark, still wrong, but the horizon bled with an unnatural red glow, staining the dunes like something long dead. The village was small, stone walls, narrow streets, empty. We stumbled into the first open courtyard, gasping, shaking, desperate for shelter, for sanctuary. That's when I saw the walls. Dr. Khalid saw them too. His hands clenched into fists. His breath came out sharp. Number not walls. Warnings. The symbols, carved into the stone, into every stone. The same ones we found on Sarah's arms. The same ones in the sand. The same ones in the sky. And then, a sound. Low. Scraping. I turned. And I saw it. The thing from the coffin. It stood in the village square. Tall. Cloaked in shadow. Featureless. Yet staring. Its head tilted. Slow. Deliberate. Like it had been waiting. Like it had always been waiting. Dr. Khalid's breath hitched. His voice came out in a whisper. "We never left." Dr. Khalid was the first to understand. I saw it happen. The moment the pieces fit together in his mind. The flicker in his eyes. The way his breath hitched. His fingers curling into fists. "No," he whispered. I turned. "What?" He shook his head, stepping backward, looking around like he was seeing the village for the first time, or for the 100th time. The stone walls, the symbols, the silence. And then he pointed at them. Old, yellowed photographs nailed to the wall of a crumbling house. I stepped closer. My stomach twisted. Familiar faces. Too familiar. Sarah, Daniel, Mr. The entire team, staring back from a photograph that should not exist. I reached out, fingers trembling, traced the cracked surface of my own face in the picture. The caption beneath it was faded, but I could still read it. 1902, dig site, final expedition photo. A cold weight settled into my chest. I swallowed hard. This isn't real. Khalid let out a breathless laugh, ragged, broken. "You don't get it," he murmured. "We were always meant to find it." His voice trembled. "We were always meant to open it." Something rumbled beneath us. The sand trembled. The village shifted. I felt it. The wrongness of it. The sky churned above us, stars rearranging themselves, the air thick with something old pressing against our skin. Khalid staggered back, gripping his head. "No," he muttered. "No, no, no, no." His words cut off. His breath hitched. His gaze locked onto something behind me. I turned, and there it was. The coffin. Sealed. New. As if we had never opened it. As if it had been waiting. The sand shifted again. Something scraping inside. My blood turned to ice. I took a step back. The lid twitched. Fresh scratches. From the inside. We hadn't uncovered history. History had uncovered us. And now it was starting over.